Good morning, everyone. Here we are back at work on our deep house track this morning. JD Nider coming to you with some production work. So for those who've been following along, this is a series of streams that I'm doing where I'm actually working on a deep house track that we started from scratch, all the way from original ideation of multiple bass lines to some bass sounds to let's turn it into a track, grabbing a sample, cutting up some sample chops, and now adding some other components. For those watching the series, I've done a little bit of off-stream work here just to advance the concept a little bit. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit, just to speed up some of the process, because sometimes this gets a little laborious. But I'll run you through some of the things that I've been working on and changing here or adding, including, for example, we started in the rhythm section. You'll see my tracks are broken up into groups where I've got a group for the kick drum, a group for the drums, a group for the bass, a group for rhythm instruments, a group for lead instruments. Then I will also group up audio, vocals, and other stuff as well. So I've got some blank groups out here so that I can work with both MIDI instruments as well as audio tracks themselves. I'll do a separate video, I think, on the way my overall templates work, because this is pretty, I think this is a pretty cool way to do the routing and allows me some pretty specific control of both the FX that I have as well as the overall pump and feel of the track. But here we are. I want to go focus on the rhythm section today. What I've added into the track now is just a simple little ARP that's intended to sit kind of in the background of the rhythm section, and it's designed to kind of play off of the piano a little bit. You can hear it kind of, it's got a descending line against the piano, which is kind of a chop with a sort of slightly upward line. And you can hear the ARP is kind of sitting in, it's kind of hitting in between where the piano chops are. So the goal is to have something that just kind of fills up some upper space and adds a little more rhythmic pull to the top end. So you'll hear how it sits in the overall track in a second. The ARP itself was, I started with, I think, one of the Ableton presets, basic pluck ARP. But as usual, I got in here and tweaked a fair bit of what was going on in here. It was originally a little soft. It didn't have a very fast attack. So I changed the filter envelope to futz with that. Didn't like where the frequency was sitting. Changed that around. I think I added a little bit more phaser, and there were some other effects in here that I've pulled out because they weren't relevant to what I was trying to accomplish with this sound. And when I pull that stuff out, you have to be careful because sometimes it's all rigged into the rest of the patch. But in this case, it wasn't too bad. So this is obviously, just using tension, which is great. It's got a sort of a very real feel to it, and it's easy to use. Just threw on a little compressor onto it. In this piece, I've got it side chained to the kick. So this is what it's going to sound like if it's flat, but if the kick is on. So you can hear that what it is doing is obviously just pulling out of the way of the kick itself, and it adds a little an extra rhythm feel to it. And then over here in my regular track tools, I probably have a little bit of EQ just to pull the bottom end out, and it was a little overly bright, so I just EQ'd that down a little bit. But other than that, that's just designed to sit there. Now, when I was playing with it, I do most of my ideation and whatnot in the session view, because I think it's a really great way to do stuff like this, where I was thinking about this sound, playing with some of the macros, and I said, really, ultimately, I probably want this to blend in over time at some point, so I just threw together one clip that automated the reverb setting in the patch itself. And what that does is this reverb section right here in the patch has got a wet dry knob on a reverb that's deep in the, I think right here in this effect rack. And so by messing with the wet dry and turning it up so much, I'm actually getting a overly wet signal with no dry in the beginning, which is nice to kind of make that sound blend in. And when we do the conversion from session view to arrangement view, I will likely use that as the way that I get that sound to be introduced. I'll probably introduce it slowly over time. And of course, the way Ableton works now with these clips is great, because it just basically brings the automation over into the automation lane, so that I can then see that automation separately. So that, you know, that's it's a really great way that works now, and makes it easy to then customize that automation down the road. But once it's up and running, something along these lines, and we'll play with both the frequency during the track, probably also play with the gate a little bit during the track, and I could imagine we'd also play with this delay and this reverb, because you can hear it's, you know, quite a different sound when those are not turned up. So alright, so that ARP was added. Then I added a pad as well. I think this was new since the last session, and it's a pretty standard, pretty, you know, straightforward pad. I started again with some preset called Johnny Soft Pad. Ended up throwing some extra work on here as an extra course that's not needed. Futzed with the LFOs. If I remember correctly, this one didn't have any LFOs turned on. It came in kind of flat, and I think it also came in non-unison. So this is the original patch. Did a little bit of work just to throw on some unison. Might even add a little more. And then threw on some LFOs just to make the patch have a little bit more movement and life to it. We're basically sitting a G minor with a couple suspensions thrown in. Not a whole lot of a big deal, but just enough to make it interesting. And I'm using velocity range probabilities again, just to add some flavor to it, so that, you know, you don't get exactly the same sound every time. Adding, you know, kind of micro adjustments to it for a little bit more organic, realistic feel. I'm pretty sure I probably randomized this a little bit as well, although it doesn't look like much. So we'll just throw an 8-point randomize on there as well. Get a little bit more humanistic feel. So between those two things being added, right, nice little simple sound sitting in the background. Now, one of the things that I also felt was that I was kind of overloading maybe the top end just a little bit. Kind of think about balancing that out. Added a really kind of an odd sound for a deep house track, but just sort of a little gritty rhythmic thing that sits down below, that sits down in the bottom section, and you'll hear what that does when I bring it into the track. It just kind of fills out some of the lower section a little bit, and I've got two different clips running of that right now. The one that I've got is called Growing, where it's not, the notes are not fully legato and connected to each other, and then this one where they are fully legato and connected to each other. You know, the scale thing is actually cool, but it makes it a little bit difficult to see. Alright, so those were all added, and I don't think I futzed much with the piano, and I've been playing around a little bit with the bass section now to add a sustain bass. So what I'm doing here is preparing my sound ideas for either a bridge or a breakdown or the intro, and this is just a relatively standard. I just made this from Wavetable, just as a kind of a, you know, slightly resonant, not overly resonant, low end sound. You know, again, for those that are listening, if you're not in good headphones or decent monitors, that probably you could probably hear that, but you're not really hearing the bottom end of that sound. So if we take the bass line from last week, or last session, this is the piano that we had originally. throw in the pad. Sounds like those hats are still a little bit loud, huh? I like dynamic, real sounding hats, but can't be overly. I did add those hats too. We'll go over those in a split second. Alright, so that's kind of the bass groove with the rhythm section. And here, now listen to what happens when I throw this low end in. It's not doing a whole lot, but it's just adding a little bit of interest down the bottom end. Almost like it's part of the bass, but not quite like it's part of the bass. And just filling out a little bit of almost like ear candy type concept there. Now that ARP is, we're gonna futz with that ARP when we actually put it in arrangement, so it's just not sitting there doing the sustain over and over and over and over again like that. We'll get there. Now, one of the other things I added off stream was a lead sound, and I took a this is one I think this is definitely not one of my tracks. So this is another one that I started with a preset and then did a whole bunch of work. This one I know I took a bunch of, believe it or not, there were other effects that were all in here that I've pulled out in making this one. And so now I've got just a relatively a relatively straightforward melody line. When I think about melody in these deep house tracks, I want something catchy and memorable, but I don't want it to be overly melodic. I don't want it to be, sort of this crazy melody, because I want it to be simple. I want it to be something that just sits on top and just makes it, super easy to remember. And later when I'm playing it off of the vocal chops, I don't want the instrument melody to carry for the vocal chops. I want the vocal chops to be able to carry. So here's the idea that I've got for the melody line right now. So it's got a little bit of interest to it and a little bit of movement here in the second half of the 4-bar phrase. And the patch itself is, composed of two different pieces, a pluck bass that I took way up top. Yeah, that's right. This is what this was. This was actually originally a bass sound, which I took up a couple octaves and made it to where I think it's got a kind of a cool pluck sound to it. And if you put it in with the rhythm section, if you sit it right over the bass, see, it's got kind of a nice little lilt to it that almost makes it just keep everything moving forward. It kind of pulls along the rhythm a little bit. Now, I noticed I had not even put the groove pool on it yet, so let's see what we get when we... most of those are actually straight on the steeds, so... yeah, it's going to swing these little second sixteenths right here. So that's been written to sit there. And again, the idea is, and later we might have that. So you can hear that even though that's, a plucky little melody that's got some bounce to it, it's not really going to conflict with the vocal chops when I'm bringing those in and out. So the last thing that I did off stream were work on these hats. And what I've got going on here, I think this is 8 bars, yep, and I've written 2 8-bar loops on it right now. The first one is the main, which is going to kind of sit with the, I think with the bass line nicely, which is, you know, typical offbeat. Now, I will also usually throw in some little blips and hits here in between, because I like to keep a little bit of more interest in it. Of course, keep it very quiet because those aren't supposed to be the main element of the hats. It's just the offbeat rhythm there. But I like a little bit more interest, as if that drummer's just kind of maybe a little bored and flicking around his drumstick on his hats while he's playing. The other thing I've done, of course, is that I've given these velocity ranges over here so that you get a little bit more human feel to them. And specifically, I've used 2 hats that are almost the same hat. You can hear they're very close to each other, but they are in fact not the same hat. Let's see where they go. They're here. So this is this one, and this is this one. And I do that because I like, again, a little bit more human feel to the hats. And by using 2 different samples from the same pack, these are actually sampled from the same drum kit, you get a little bit more realistic feel to them, which I think is a cool way to go about it. Now, these also had a reverb tail already on them. You can hear the reverb at the end of that sample, which was kind of funny, because then when I started thinking about things like my open hat, it did not have a reverb tail on it. So I brought in a reverb into this drum rack so I could route straight into that and get some reverb on that. That also helped with the little ticks and whatnot, because I could bring them effectively into the same space by giving them a little bit of reverb tail as well. Now, what I've also done is gone ahead and written a busier section. I left the clicks and ticks in so that we've got, you know, a little bit of weirdness, but I also had set up a choke group, I think, so they're going to choke each other out if they're playing on the same. And again, I've got some variation going on with the velocity ranges here to make sure that you get some human feel on this, and on the ticks and whatnot, you actually can pump that up pretty considerably. I'd also consider doing some probability work on the little ticks so that they're not the same every time. We'll see about that as I move into the next section. So with that, I've got most of the elements for the track that I want to try to work with. I've got a whole series of vocal chops. Right, and I've got the main one. And I'm not quite happy yet with the way that sample has come out. I've got a little bit of work to do to clean that up. You can hear it glitching a little bit from the warping. And again, that's because I took a sample that was originally at a relatively low BPM and have bumped it up to a higher BPM. I also noticed while we were playing with this that these were off time. That's better. See. Now here, this one, I went ahead and made a version that had a formant down harmony to it. You know, not a big deal, not a, you know, nothing tremendous there, but just enough that it will make for an interesting variation There we go. And we're going to do a set 1.1.1 here. There we go. So at some point when you got that, you can sit in the background, which actually goes against this harmony. So this has got a lower harmony. This has got the upper harmony in it. Then I've got this one, which adds a little vocal growl in, which I think is great. I love when she leans into that just. So I'll end up using all of those as to sort of create the vocal melody for the track, and then these are just some ums and ahs and other little pieces, other little ad libs that we can throw in. So I think that's what we did offline. I'm gonna do another live stream as I start the arrangement for this. I'd say in probably a day or so, but I wanted to check in, stream this. If you're here with me, thank you for being with me. I appreciate the view. If you're catching this afterwards, I hope you enjoyed, and would love to hear your thoughts on what you see. And thanks, everyone. Let's have a great day.